Security at the federal courthouse is tightened as 8 members of a notorious violent gang go to trial. The defendants are accused members of the Tongan Crip gang, or TCG.
The government says members have committed violent acts like murder, robbery, and assault.
Did you catch this? 100% Samoan.
I won't hesitate to shoot anyone.
You what?
No, I wouldn't hesitate to shoot anyone if they come and mess with me.
People always say Samoans are some of the nicest, most respectful people you'll ever meet, and a lot of that is true. But back in the 1990s, there was another side to them. During that era, Samoan crews were some of the most violent, fearless, and ruthless groups operating on the West Coast. And even outside of it, they were tied to armed robberies, express kidnappings, drug trafficking, executions, mass shootings, and non-stop intimidation.
They're using a high level of violence and fear.
The list of crimes numbers more than 30 and includes an armed robbery at this restaurant in 2008.
These robbers come in, guns blazing, and just scare people to death.
What made them especially scary was how they used violence. One punch could knock you out cold. Wearing the wrong color in the wrong place could cost you your life. Sometimes even hesitating for a second was enough to get you killed. They showed no mercy. Let's dive in. The Suicidals came together in the 1990s as the muscle for the Sons of Samoa, SOS. Operating out of Long Beach, California, they weren't just another street crew. They built a reputation around extreme violence and a kind of reckless fearlessness that matched their name. Self-preservation didn't factor into how they moved. Violence was their language, and they used it loudly, deliberately, and often, not just to control territory, but to break the spirit of anyone who lived or passed through it. Their goal wasn't only physical dominance. It was psychological control. As SOS's enforcement arm, the Suicidals specialized in what can best be described as expressive violence, acts carried out not for profit, but for impact. The message always mattered more than the body count. If you were scared to walk down an alley, hesitate before speaking to police, or think twice about doing business nearby, then the tactic worked. That approach allowed them to maintain a long-running reign of terror in parts of Long Beach, especially in and around alleyways where SOS operated its drug trade.
But then again, I like fighting, shooting, and carrying on this and that. But I had to do it, if I really want to get into it, that's what I wanted to do.
It's all right. This ain't the life to live, though, but it's the life that we chose,
The most notorious expression of that mindset was a ritualized act known on the street as a check. This was the gang's ultimate statement of control. A check wasn't planned like a hit or motivated by money. It was spontaneous, public, and final. Someone would be stopped, challenged, and killed purely to remind everyone else who owned the ground they were standing on. The clearest example happened late at night on May 4th, 1996. A 26-year-old man named Jorge Martinez was walking through an alley near 14th Street and Linden Avenue when he crossed paths with members of the Suicidals. Among them was 21-year-old Wayne Talfi, known on the street as Big Fassie. Martinez was confronted and hit with the standard gang challenge. "Where you from?" He didn't respond fast enough. That hesitation was enough. Talfi pulled the trigger and shot him dead right there in the alley. Police later found money still in Martinez's pocket, making it clear that theft was never the point. The killing was pure enforcement. Being in the wrong place at the wrong time could cost you your life. What made the situation even darker was what came next. 2 days after the murder, the violence didn't stop. It escalated. Members of the Suicidals targeted the home of Martinez's grieving girlfriend and sprayed it with bullets. It was calculated witness intimidation, designed to scare anyone connected to the case into silence. The tactic worked exactly as intended. Terrified for her life, the girlfriend fled California altogether. With no cooperative witnesses, the case stalled and eventually went cold. That single act of intimidation echoed for decades. When Wayne Talfi was finally arrested in 2015, the fear seeded in the 1990s was still doing its job. Even with an arrest, the damage was done. His 2020 trial ended in a hung jury, showing just how effective the Suicidals' strategy had been. Day to day, though, the Suicidals didn't rely solely on murder to enforce control. For street-level dominance, especially around their PCP and cocaine operations, they used a campaign of constant intimidation, known as the one-hitter quitter. This was a robbery tactic built around raw physical force. force. Victims were ambushed and knocked unconscious with a single full-power punch, usually to the jaw or head, before being stripped of their belongings. Again, the point wasn't just theft, it was theater. Each attack reinforced the gang's reputation for strength and savagery. Firearms weren't needed, fists were enough.
The blacks and Hispanics, they get tired of getting beaten up by Samoans. Because that's all we know is fist fight. You know, and the only way they could to retaliate on us is to get their guns.
Over time, stories spread and the legend grew. Rivals thought twice before testing them. Locals learned to keep their heads down. The physical toll on victims was severe. Concussions, broken jaws, and long-term brain injuries were common. But the psychological damage ran even deeper. The Sons of Samoa, better known as SOS, didn't begin as a major criminal force. Like many immigrant street groups, they started out small and defensive. In the early 1980s, Samoan families were settling into heavily segregated, economically struggling cities like Long Beach, Carson, and Compton. Their kids grew up caught between cultures, dealing with language barriers, cultural misunderstandings, and constant pressure from established gangs. SOS was formed as a way to protect themselves in neighborhoods where vulnerability often meant becoming a target. But protection didn't last long. By the mid to late 1980s, SOS had already begun reshaping itself. The group adopted the look, structure, and street politics of the dominant Crips culture around them, eventually forming affiliations that helped them survive and expand. What started as an enclave quickly hardened into an organization with rules, hierarchy, and an appetite for power. By 1985, Long Beach police were already estimating around 200 SOS members in the city. That was just the beginning.
Did you catch this? 100% Samoan.
The 1990s marked the real transformation. SOS fully crossed the line from neighborhood protection into outright predatory criminality. Drugging became their main engine, PCP and coke in particular, and the group evolved into a coordinated criminal enterprise with reach beyond California. They weren't just hustling corners anymore. They were moving weight, controlling territory, and enforcing their will through violence that was meant to be seen, remembered, and feared.
In the past 10 years, we've seen the gangs trade in their knives and zip guns for Uzis and AK-47s. And now many have turned away from burglary and theft to take up the more lucrative business of dealing drugs.
What truly defined SOS during this era wasn't just crime, but how they committed it. SOS believed in excess. One bullet wasn't enough when a full magazine could be emptied. Attacks were often public, chaotic, and deliberately brutal. The point was to create a zone where no one talked to police, no one testified, and no one even wanted to be seen watching. They also leaned into a reputation for raw physical power. Whether consciously or not, SOS weaponized the warrior stereotype often imposed on Polynesian men, using it to intimidate rivals and civilians alike. Even gangs with larger numbers hesitated, because SOS wasn't known for backing down or pulling punches. Their violence suggested they had no off switch. One of the earliest events that shaped their long-term reputation happened in late 1986, though its influence carried well into the 1990s. Paul Palalawa Tuilepa, an SOS member, walked into a crowded Long Beach bar during a Monday night football game armed with a rifle. When twin brothers Melvin and Calvin resisted the robbery, Tuilepa responded with overwhelming force. Melvin was shot in the neck and killed instantly. Tuilepa then turned the weapon on Calvin, shooting him in the chest. He didn't stop there. A bystander named Bruce was shot, and then, most chillingly, the bartender, who had already complied, was shot as well. The incident sent shockwaves through Long Beach and effectively announced a doctrine SOS would follow for years. Tuilepa was eventually sentenced to death in 2000, but by then, the damage to the city's sense of safety had already been done. By the mid-1990s, SOS pushed their cruelty even further. Violence became more personal, more humiliating, and more psychologically devastating. A haunting example came in May 1996 with the kidnapping and murder of 25-year-old Nolan Pamintuan. The crime was led by SOS figure Ropati Sumanu and included his 15-year-old brother, Tautai. Pamintuan was abducted the night before his wedding. Instead of killing him quickly, the gang dragged the ordeal out, forcing him to visit multiple ATMs and drain his accounts. After they got the money, they executed him. His body was discovered the morning he was supposed to get married. His fiancée, Rowena Pinello, was informed of his murder just 30 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. The cruelty of the timing alone stunned the Bay Area and cemented SOS's reputation as a gang that didn't just kill, it destroyed lives in the most devastating way possible. As their reputation grew, so did their footprint. By the 1990s, SOS chapters had spread well beyond Southern California, popping up in Washington, Alaska, Missouri, Utah, and Hawaii. Their expansion wasn't subtle or cooperative. They moved into new areas by force, taking over drug markets and imposing Long Beach-style discipline on cities that weren't prepared for that level of organization or violence.
All members in the older ranks are Samoans and related. Almost 200 members from Long Beach alone are in prison for crimes that started assault, moved to robbery, and even murder.
Holding all of this together was their enforcement arm, the Suicidals. This hyper-violent clique operated primarily out of Long Beach and served as the muscle that made SOS's threats believable. They handled territorial control, street-level discipline, and the daily terror that kept drug operations running smoothly. Through tactics like ritualistic executions known as checks and constant assaults like the one-hitter-quitter robberies, the Suicidals ensured that fear never faded. By the end of the 1990s, the Sons of Samoa were no longer just a gang born from survival. They had become a fully realized criminal organization. The Tongan Crip gang, better known as TCG, stood out as one of the most aggressive and fast-spreading Polynesian street gangs to emerge from Southern California. While groups like the Sons of Samoa focused on locking down specific territories like Long Beach, TCG moved differently. They specialized in mob violence, armed takeover robberies, and a level of intimidation that felt sudden and overwhelming. Wherever they went, they brought the full intensity of LA street warfare with them. TCG first took shape in Inglewood back in the 1970s. At that stage, they were still local, still forming their identity, but everything changed in the late 1980s when the gang made a bold and violent move eastward into Utah. By the early 1990s, law enforcement in Utah was already describing TCG as one of the most organized and dangerous gangs in the state. For communities that had never experienced large-scale gang violence, the arrival of TCG was a shock to the system.
I would have to say that the majority of law enforcement agencies in the area are familiar with the TCGs.
Utah wasn't Los Angeles. There were no long-established gang borders or expectations of color politics in public spaces. TCG exploited that. They adapted to their new environment by turning the violence up. Their expansion functioned like criminal colonialism: enter a new area, overwhelm it with fear, and establish control before anyone knows what's happening. Public places that once felt neutral suddenly became contested ground. Nothing illustrates this mindset more clearly than the killing of Aaron Chapman. On September 1st, 1993, Chapman, just 17 years old, attended a rock concert at the Triad Amphitheater in downtown Salt Lake City. When the show ended, he walked back to his car like everyone else in the crowd. What happened next had nothing to do with drugs, money, or a personal dispute. It came down to the color of his shirt. In the parking lot, Chapman was surrounded by a group of roughly 8 to 10 TCG members. The attack was fast, collective, and brutal, a perfect example of the gang's mob-swarming mentality. The teenager was beaten and killed simply for being in the wrong place, at the wrong time, wearing the wrong color. The message was unmistakable. LA-style color banging had arrived in Utah, and TCG would enforce it anywhere, even in a crowded concert parking lot. The murder sent shockwaves through the state. For the public, it was a terrifying introduction to a type of gang violence they had only seen on the news. For TCG, it was a declaration. Large public spaces were no longer neutral. They were territory, and territory would be policed through violence. Beyond street enforcement, TCG members built status inside the gang through high-risk armed robberies, storming locations with guns, confronting employees and customers face-to-face, and taking control through fear. Targets included places like the Republic parking garage, the Gen X clothing store, and even a Walmart. The fact that they were willing to bring loaded firearms into a busy family retail store showed just how little they cared about collateral damage or mass casualties.
They're using a high level of violence and fear.
The list of crimes numbers more than 30 and includes an armed robbery at this restaurant in 2008.
These robbers come in, guns blazing, and just scare people to death.
Money mattered, but reputation mattered more. One of the clearest windows into TCG's internal culture came from a recorded jailhouse phone call involving gang member Eric Kamahili. In that conversation, Kamahili openly stated that he needed to commit at least 3 more robberies to keep his status intact. That single line revealed everything. Violence was a scoreboard. Robberies were treated like stats, milestones that proved your worth. If your numbers slipped, so did your standing. This gamified mentality guaranteed nonstop violence. There was always another robbery needed, another risky move required to stay respected. Members weren't just chasing money, they were chasing validation inside a system that rewarded recklessness. The damage caused by TCG in the 1990s didn't fade when the decade ended. The feuds they sparked and the structures they built lasted for years. In 2010, federal authorities indicted 17 TCG members in one of the largest RICO cases Utah had ever seen. The charges included armed robbery, drug trafficking, and witness intimidation, with criminal patterns traced all the way back to the gang's early expansion years.
The defendants are accused members of the Tongan Crip gang, or TCG.
The U.S. Marshal's office says it can't take any chances when the case involves so many people at one time.
The men are facing federal charges involving racketeering and conspiracy. The government says members have committed violent acts like murder, robbery, and assault.
Even decades later, the gang's violence showed no sense of boundaries or restraint. Retaliatory cycles followed the same blueprint laid down in the 1990s. In one particularly chilling episode, a dispute that began at a Tongan church spiraled outward and ended with an innocent man dead. The setting didn't matter. Sacred spaces offered no protection. Conflict, once ignited, was allowed to consume everything around it. The Park Village Compton Crips, or PVCC, were a multi-ethnic gang rooted in Compton, but one specific clique inside the set, the Samoan side, developed a reputation that set them apart. While many Samoan gangs in Southern California focused on holding territory or expanding into new areas, the PVCC Samoan side took a different path. Their violence wasn't just aimed at rivals or street-level control. They went after authority itself. Their goal was to turn their turf into a place that couldn't be governed, patrolled, or controlled by anyone outside the gang. That mindset shaped everything they did throughout the 1990s. Instead of simply defending corners or drug spots, the PVCC Samoan side treated law enforcement and private security as enemies. Their posture looked less like traditional gang warfare and more like insurgency. Anyone tasked with maintaining order inside their territory was seen as a target. By the end of the decade, that approach would explode into one of the most shocking acts of gang violence in the area. That explosion came in January 1999 at the New Wilmington Arms apartment complex. The attack marked the brutal climax of the PVCC Samoan side's campaign against authority and served as a violent closing chapter to the decade. The shooter was David James Livingston, known on the street as Goldie, a confirmed Park Village gang member. Livingston attacked the private security team working at the apartment complex, turning the location into a crime scene that shocked the community. 2 security guards were executed during the assault, 49-year-old Remigio Malinao and 62-year-old Roderico Paz. These were working-class men hired to protect an apartment complex and its residents. Livingston didn't stop after killing them. 2 additional security guards were shot and wounded in the same attack, bringing the total number of casualties to 4. The scope of the violence made it clear that this wasn't about settling a personal dispute. It was a targeted mass shooting aimed squarely at internal security. What made the attack especially disturbing was who the victims were. One of the guards was 62 years old, far removed from street life, simply trying to earn a living. Their deaths highlighted just how far the PVCC Samoan side was willing to go. There was no line they wouldn't cross. By wiping out the complex's security detail, the gang sent a clear signal that the area belonged to them alone. Outside authority would not be tolerated. The Wilmington Arms massacre didn't come out of nowhere. Livingston was already known as a hardened gang member. In 1998, just a year earlier, he had been involved in a separate attempted murder of a rival gang member. That conviction helped establish that the apartment complex attack wasn't the act of someone snapping. It was the calculated escalation of a soldier who had been fighting on multiple fronts for years. By 1999, he wasn't just targeting rivals, he was striking at the system itself. Throughout the 1990s, the PVCC Samoan side had also been deeply involved in territorial wars across Compton. Their drive for dominance put them into direct conflict with other Polynesian gangs, most notably the Sons of Samoa, who were based in Long Beach and held significant influence. That rivalry fueled retaliations, ongoing disputes, and a steady rise in violence between the two groups. By expanding their targets to include security guards and authority figures, the PVCC Samoan side crossed a line that many gangs avoided. That approach cemented their reputation as one of the most dangerous Samoan-linked cliques of the era and set a precedent that would echo into the next generation of gang violence.